If you keep that baby, I'll destroy your life. The words hit Maya like a thunderclap, echoing in the dark mansion as Julian's cold eyes bore into hers. Her heart shattered, but in that moment, she made a choice. She would run, she would fight, and she would protect her child at all costs. She didn't know it yet, but 5 years later, the man who swore to ruin her would crawl to her feet, begging for what he had once tried to destroy. Hello, beautiful souls. I'm James, and I'm so glad you're here with me today. Before we dive into this story of love, courage, and resilience, let's take a moment to open our hearts. Dear Lord, we thank you for this day, for the breath in our lungs, and the love that surrounds us. Bless every viewer watching this right now. Protect their families, guide their paths, heal their hearts, and fill their lives with hope, strength, and unshakable peace. Let every challenge they face be met with courage, every tear they shed be washed away with your love, and every dream they hold be touched by your grace. Amen. If you felt that prayer in your heart, type Amen in the comments, and let's share this blessing together. Maya had never feared silence before, but tonight the silence felt like it had teeth. She stood in the middle of the penthouse living room, the city lights behind her trembling like nervous stars. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She tried to clasp them together, but even her fingers betrayed her. Julian stood across from her, tall, composed, terrifyingly still. He looked like a statue carved from cold marble, beautiful, untouchable, and merciless. Maya wondered when he'd changed, or if she had simply refused to see who he really was. She swallowed hard, her throat burning. "Julian," she whispered, "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air, fragile enough to break under his stare. For one heartbeat, his gaze softened, just for a flicker, like a dying candle. Then everything in him turned to ice, his jaw locked, his shoulders stiffened. His eyes darkened with a storm she didn't recognize. He stepped forward, slow and deliberate, as if approaching a crime scene. "What did you just say?" he asked. His voice wasn't loud, but it hit her like a slap. "I'm pregnant," she repeated, softer this time. Her voice wasn't shaking from fear, she realized. It was shaking from hope. Hope that he might hold her. Hope that he might smile. Hope that the man she loved still existed somewhere inside this version of him. But Julian's expression didn't flicker again. He stared at her stomach as if it were a ticking bomb strapped to her body. "Maya." No, just one word. But the weight of it felt like her ribs were collapsing. "You can't keep it," he added. Her breath hitched. She stepped back without meaning to. Julian followed her, closing the distance with quiet, frightening certainty. "You don't understand," he said, voice dropping lower. His tone carried something she had never heard from him. Dread. Real dread. The kind people feel when their world is about to burn down. "What don't I understand?" she whispered. He dragged a hand through his hair, pacing once like a caged predator. "My father," he muttered. "Your father. What about him?" Julian exhaled sharply. "He won't allow this, baby." Maya blinked. "He doesn't get to decide that." Julian's laugh was short and humorless. "You don't know him." A chill spread down Maya's spine. She'd seen Mr. Voss only twice, once at their engagement dinner, once at their wedding, and both times his presence felt like sitting too close to a burning fireplace. Powerful, devouring, cruel, but she never imagined he could reach this far into their lives. "What does he have to do with our child?" she asked. Julian looked away. His silence was louder than shouting. "Julian," Maya said again, stepping closer. "Talk to me. We can figure this out." "No," he snapped. She froze. He hadn't yelled at her before. He hadn't even raised his voice at her in all their time together. But now he was a stranger wearing the face she once loved. He took a deep breath, as if preparing to break something delicate. And then he did. "If you keep that baby," he said quietly, I will destroy your life. The world around her stilled. Her heartbeat stopped. She stared at him, waiting for the punchline, waiting for him to break, to say he didn't mean it, to admit someone was forcing him to speak like this. But he didn't break. He didn't soften. He didn't blink. You would ruin me, Maya whispered. He nodded once, barely, as if agreeing to something inevitable. I'll evict the clinic, he said. Her chest tightened. Her family's tiny clinic was their world. My brother, she asked, voice thin. He looked away again. He won't survive the fraud charges. Maya staggered back as if he'd shoved her. You would do that to him. I don't want to, he said softly. But my father. I'm not carrying your father's baby, Maya snapped. Julian flinched. For the first time he looked wounded, as if she had touched the exact place he was most breakable. But his pain didn't change the threat. It only made it more twisted. Maya, he said, lowering his voice, if you keep it, he'll cut me out of everything. He'll ruin me. Ruin us. Ruin your family. Ruin your future. She shook her head. That's not love, Julian. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Because deep down he knew. He knew exactly what he was choosing. And he wasn't choosing her. I can't lose my inheritance, he finally said. The words were whisper-soft, but they sliced her open. She stared at him. This man she had studied, loved, trusted. Her mind replayed every quiet morning, every soft kiss, every late-night confession he'd made while lying beside her in the dark. Had any of it been real, or had she been loving a version of him he wore like a tailored suit? I thought you loved me, she whispered. Julian closed his eyes. Pain flickered behind them. I do, he said. Then why are you talking like this? Because, he said, voice trembling for the first time, I don't have a choice. Tears stung Maya's eyes. You always have a choice, he shook his head. Not with him. She wiped her cheeks quickly, refusing to let him see her fall apart. Then I'll go, she said. Julian's eyes snapped open. He stepped forward, gripping her arms. No, you can't leave. His voice cracked dangerously. If you leave, everything becomes worse. For you, she said. No, he growled. For you. Maya pulled away, heart pounding. Her breath was unsteady, her entire world disintegrating piece by piece. I won't abort my child, she said firmly. Something inside Julian shattered. He didn't yell. He didn't plead. He didn't threaten again. He simply shut down, emotionless, resigned, hollowed out. Then I can't protect you, he whispered. Maya stepped back. Then another step. Her hand covered her stomach. The child she hadn't even met yet felt like a tiny ember of warmth against the freezing world Julian was forcing her into. If you won't protect us, she said, voice steadier than she felt, I will. Julian stared at her, an unreadable mix of regret, fear, and something darker. She turned away before she could lose her resolve. She grabbed her coat, her bag, nothing else. Her life in two hands. She stepped into the hallway. The elevator seemed miles away. Her legs trembled with every step. She didn't know where she would go. She didn't know how she would survive. She only knew she had to leave before his father's shadow swallowed her whole. As she pressed the elevator button, tears blurred her vision. But she didn't wipe them. Not anymore. This pain was hers. This decision was hers. This child was hers. The elevator dinged softly. She stepped inside without looking back. The doors closed slowly, cutting off the last glimpse of the life she once believed in. Her hand instinctively held her stomach again. Her voice trembled as she whispered into the quiet space. I'm so sorry you had to hear all of that, little one, but I promise you I will keep you safe. She didn't notice the shape in the shadows at the far end of the hallway. She didn't see the tall figure standing motionless. She didn't see the familiar outline of Julian's body, slumped forward, watching her leave with something broken in his posture. But she felt it. A chill crawled up her spine, like eyes were on her, like the night wasn't done with her yet. She kept her gaze straight ahead, refusing to turn around. The elevator doors finally sealed her within their metallic walls. She exhaled shakily. Her future was suddenly a dark, twisting road she had to walk alone. But for the first time that night, she felt a strange spark of courage rising behind the fear. Nothing mattered more than the child she carried, not wealth, not power, not the Voss Empire, not even Julian. She stepped out into the cold night air, unaware that the world behind her was already shifting, tightening, preparing to follow her wherever she fled. Maya didn't sleep that night. She paced the tiny room she'd rented for a few hours, listening to the old fan rattle above her, trying to calm her shaking hands. She kept replaying the sight of Julian's silhouette inside the car, unmoving, unreadable, watching her leave as if she were something he had already lost. By the time the sky turned the faintest shade of blue, Maya had made up her mind. She grabbed her small backpack, the only thing she had left that wasn't touched by him or his father's shadow, and stepped outside before the city fully woke. The bus station at sunrise felt like another world, quiet, empty, almost safe. Only a few travelers lingered on the benches, bundled in jackets, holding bags that looked as worn out as their faces. Maya kept a hand over her stomach, rubbing gently, as if reassuring the tiny life growing inside her that things would get better. She bought the cheapest ticket to the only place she could think of, the rural community she'd once volunteered in during her second year of medical school. Back then, she spent weekends teaching basic health classes to women who worked double shifts at fields and factories. They had given her tamarind candy, warm smiles, and stories she never forgot. Now she was returning with nothing but fear in her chest and a future she didn't know how to protect. When the bus rumbled to life, Maya felt her throat tighten. She stared out the window as the city blurred into steel and concrete streaks. Every turn, every light, every passing building felt like she was shedding pieces of the life she once had. Her phone buzzed once in her pocket. She didn't look. She turned it off instead and shoved it deep into her bag. Nobody could know where she was going, especially not Julian, especially not the man who controlled him like a puppet. The ride felt endless. She kept drifting in and out of restless half-sleep, waking each time the bus hit a bump or someone coughed. Her mind wouldn't quiet. Every time her eyes closed, she saw Julian's face, hard, conflicted, hollowed out by a fear she didn't yet understand. And as much as she hated it, a part of her grieved the version of him she once loved. But grief didn't matter now. Survival did. When the bus finally stopped at the small rural station, Maya stepped out into dusty morning light. The place looked exactly as she remembered. Dirt roads, fruit vendors on wooden carts, chickens wandering around like they owned the land. It wasn't much, but it was far from the world that threatened her. She walked to the small community center she'd volunteered in years before, hoping someone still remembered her. Inside, an older woman with warm eyes and silver hair recognized her instantly. "Dr. Maya," she gasped. Maya smiled weakly. "Not a doctor yet, but yes, it's me." The woman hugged her without question, as if she sensed Maya was carrying more than just a backpack. Within hours, Maya was helping again. It felt strange how quickly her hands remembered the work, bandaging cuts, checking blood pressure, helping pregnant women breathe through contractions. Her body moved on instinct, even though her thoughts kept drifting back to the threats she'd run from. The women welcomed her with open arms. They offered food, shared gossip, laughed loudly, and treated her as if she belonged. Slowly, piece by piece, Maya stitched herself into their world. Days turned into weeks. Maya found herself living in a tiny room above the community center, sleeping on a thin mattress and waking each day to the sound of roosters and children playing outside. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt honest. Sometimes that honesty hurt because it reminded her how false her life with Julian had been. Other times it felt like healing. Her stomach grew. She began to feel the faint flutter of the baby moving, like tiny whispers from inside. Each flutter strengthened her resolve. Each flutter reminded her why she'd left everything behind. The women noticed her pregnancy but never asked who the father was. They only made sure she was fed and rested, offering herbal teas and warm meals with quiet affection. Soon, word spread that Maya had medical training. People from nearby villages came seeking help. Fevers, infections, bites, fractures, newborns coming too early or too late. Maya worked tirelessly, sometimes forgetting to eat, sometimes crying alone after difficult cases, sometimes laughing with the mothers she helped. Her kindness didn't just serve the community, it built one. People brought wood to fix the clinic roof. Someone donated metal sheets for a new shelf. Farmers delivered baskets of vegetables every week. Her small workspace grew into a space that breathed hope. Yet even in that warmth, unease lived in the back of her mind. Every time she heard a car door slam outside, her heart jumped. Every time a stranger asked her name, her hands went cold. Every evening she checked twice, sometimes 3 times, to ensure the clinic doors were locked. She told herself she was being paranoid, but fear had a memory, and hers remembered Julian's threats too clearly. One evening the sky blushed pink as the sun set behind the fields. Maya was alone in the clinic, sweeping the floor and humming softly to calm herself. The other women had left early for a village celebration, insisting she rest. But rest was impossible with the weight she carried, inside her body and inside her heart. She stepped outside to lock up, inhaling the scent of earth, mango trees, and distant smoke from cooking fires. Just as she bent to place the broom beside the doorway, something caught her eye. A sheet of paper lay on the doorstep, not blown by wind, not fallen accidentally. Placed, deliberately placed. Maya stiffened. She glanced around. The road was empty. The fields were quiet. Crickets hummed in the bushes. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She slowly bent down and picked up the paper. A drawing. A beautifully detailed sketch of a baby wrapped in soft light, sleeping peacefully as if protected by the world. The lines were delicate, confident, almost hauntingly gentle. Tears stung her eyes. She hadn't seen this style in years. She knew it instantly. Her hands trembled as she turned the page over. At the bottom corner were 2 small initials written in a careful hand. JV Maya felt her knees weaken. This wasn't possible. Nobody here knew Julian. Nobody here knew about his art. He never shared it publicly. Not with business associates, not with the world, not with anyone except her during their quietest moments. This drawing, it was him. It was undeniably him. Her breath grew tight. Cold sweat dotted her back. For the first time since running, she felt truly unsafe. The horizon darkened, the wind shifted, and Maya clutched the drawing to her chest, feeling her heartbeat crash wildly against her ribs. The sketch wasn't just in Julian's exact drawing style. The initials at the bottom were written in the same slanted handwriting he used only on personal letters. Letters he once swore no one else would ever see. The monsoon rolled over the valley like a warning, thunder cracking against the tin. Rooftops as Maya clutched her belly and sank to her knees on the clinic floor. Rain seeped under the door in thin silver streams. The wind rattled the shutters as if urging her to push, to breathe, to fight. When her daughter finally arrived, she came with a soft cry that sliced through the storm like a fragile beacon. Brown-skinned, bright-eyed, impossibly tiny, yet so fiercely alive she seemed carved out of determination itself. Maya wrapped the infant against her chest, trembling from pain and disbelief, and the world momentarily quieted, as if honoring the birth of a secret no one should ever discover. Her daughter's fingers curled instinctively around hers, gripping with a strength no newborn should have. That small hold pulled Maya back from every fear she'd ever carried. It anchored her, steadied her, reminded her that leaving Julian hadn't been an act of cowardice, but the only act of survival she had left. Outside, the storm eased into a soft hum, raindrops gliding down like blessings. Inside, Maya kissed her daughter's forehead and whispered a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. "You will grow without fear. I'll make sure of it." As months turned into years, the little girl bloomed like wildflowers after rain. She laughed easily, loved deeply, and asked questions with a seriousness that made grown women fall silent. But it was her drawings that unsettled everyone. Walls that once held medical charts now brimmed with sketches, landscapes with impossible perspective, faces drawn with haunting accuracy, expressions captured in strokes that looked practiced, almost inherited. Volunteers praised her talent, marveling at how a child so young could sketch with such precision, but Maya could barely breathe when she saw them. These weren't ordinary drawings. These were Julian's hands on paper. The same angled shading, the same subtle cross-hatching, the same soft curves around the eyes, the same pressure at the corners of the mouth. He had never shown his art publicly. He'd kept it locked away, shared only once with her. Late at night, when he'd confessed he sketched to calm the storms in his mind. No one else knew. No one else could know. Yet her daughter's talent grew as if guided by an invisible mentor. That was when the gifts began. First, a set of sketch pencils, fine, expensive, imported, the kind Maya had only ever seen in Julian's private studio. Then a watercolor notebook, the cover embossed with pressed gold leaves. After that, a small carved bird, smooth and polished, its wings in mid-flight. Volunteers teased her, claiming someone in town must have a crush, someone too shy to come forward. Maya forced a smile, but inside her stomach twisted. She knew admiration. She knew romance. She knew gifts given with innocent intentions. This was none of those. This was surveillance, a warning, a reminder. She watched the windows at night, locked the doors twice, triple-checked them when wind scraped against the walls. Her daughter, completely unaware, continued filling page after page with drawings that looked like Julian's ghosts had taught her. The older women whispered that talent like hers came from bloodline, and that word, bloodline, stabbed Maya every time she heard it. One night, after tucking her daughter into bed and kissing her cheek, Maya stepped onto the porch for air. The night was cool. The moon stretched thin like a blade. Fireflies floated above the tall grass. Everything seemed peaceful, almost serene. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders and breathed out slowly, letting the night calm her nerves. Then she saw it, a shadow, tall, male, moving across the yard with unhurried confidence. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She held her breath, watching the silhouette glide near the fence line. Her palms slicked with sweat. For a moment she couldn't move, couldn't even blink. The figure paused, as if sensing her, head turning toward the porch. Her lungs squeezed tight. She reached blindly for the light switch, flicking it on with trembling fingers. The bulb flashed. A harsh beam hit the yard. The shadow was gone. No footsteps, no retreating figure, no rustle of leaves, just darkness swallowing everything whole. Her breath fractured into shallow pieces. She scanned the ground, the trees, the road, but the world suddenly looked emptier than it had a moment before. Too empty, too quiet. Then she saw it on the porch steps. Another carved bird. She picked it up with shaking hands. Her fingertips traced the grooves along the wings. The wood was smooth, dark, impossibly rare. She brought it closer to the light, examining the grain. the tiny engraved initials near the base. Her stomach dropped. This was not local wood, not from the village, not from any shop, not from any passing traveler. This was wood from a tree found only on one estate, an estate she had run from, an estate she had sworn never to see again. Her breath stopped. Her heart did too. 5 years had passed since the monsoon night that had changed Maya's life forever. The little clinic she had built from scraps and courage had grown into something she could barely recognize: Aurora Health Network, a sprawling national movement dedicated to women who had been ignored, silenced, and overlooked for far too long. Its walls gleamed with new paint, its rooms filled with equipment she could not have imagined acquiring on her own. Volunteers bustled through the hallways with purpose, carrying charts, supplies, and hope in equal measure. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic, paper, and the faint fragrance of fresh flowers Maya's daughter had insisted on putting in every room. The very building seemed alive with energy, buzzing with lives that depended on her strength and vision. Media outlets called her a revolutionary, a voice for the voiceless, a healer who refused to bend to the whims of the powerful. Newspapers, websites, and social media campaigns spread her story like wildfire, but she never allowed herself to become distracted by the praise. It had taken her years to understand that recognition was meaningless if it didn't come with real change. The movement had grown because she poured herself into it, because she stayed awake when others slept, because she refused to let fear dictate her life or the lives of the women she had promised to protect. Ayan had been at her side almost from the beginning. Gentle, steadfast, patient, he moved through her world quietly, without demanding or overwhelming. Where Julian had been forceful, impatient, and loud, Ayan offered the steady warmth of someone who understood the weight of trauma. He knew when to speak and when to remain silent. He knew how to support without overshadowing. Together, they had built a rhythm to the clinic and the larger movement, a rhythm that allowed Maya to finally breathe in moments without fear, even if only briefly. She had learned to trust him, even as the shadows of the past lingered at the edges of her mind. Despite the outward calm and success, Maya could never shake the knowledge that power attracted predators. Her organization's success had drawn attention beyond the scope of goodwill. Investigations erupted regarding Julian's empire, which had long been a house of cards built on fraud, bribes, and illicit land acquisitions. Journalists dug deep, uncovering evidence of financial manipulation, shady contracts, and secret offshore accounts. Rumors about Julian's whereabouts proliferated. Some whispered that he had taken his own life to escape disgrace. Others claimed he had vanished, slipping into some secret world, untouchable and invisible. Maya did not believe either story. Julian's cleverness, his arrogance, and the ghosts of the Voss Empire made both outcomes seem improbable. He had survived worse, and she had no doubt that he would try to survive again. Aurora's largest fundraiser was months in the planning. The event hall was bathed in gold and white light, chandeliers shimmering above tables arranged with surgical precision. Donors, activists, and journalists filled the space, their eyes fixed on Maya as she moved through the crowd, offering smiles, nods, and brief words of encouragement. Everything was orchestrated to perfection, yet Maya's instincts refused to relax. She noticed the small details: the unusual placement of a volunteer at the back of the hall, the way some attendees glanced around nervously, the subtle shifts in the room's energy that no amount of preparation could mask. A hooded volunteer moved differently than the rest, his posture taut and tense, scanning the room with a vigilance that unsettled her. Maya's heart quickened. She felt the familiar pull of recognition, a whisper at the base of her spine that screamed danger. Without drawing attention, she moved closer to him, weaving through the crowd with careful steps, eyes locked on the figure whose presence seemed unnatural among the ordinary volunteers. Every instinct she had developed over the past 5 years screamed at her to be cautious. She could feel her daughter's small hands wrapped around her heart from thousands of miles away. When the volunteer finally slipped behind a curtain leading backstage, Maya followed. Her pulse pounded with a mixture of fear, anticipation, and that familiar, suffocating anxiety she had carried since Julian's threats. She reached the curtain just in time to see the figure vanish into the shadows. Maya stepped closer, her breath caught, eyes scanning the dimly lit corridor. Then she saw it. Something small, metallic, catching the last flickers of light. A silver cufflink engraved with the initials JV. Her hands trembled as she bent to pick it up. The cufflink was unmistakable. It had belonged to Julian, crafted with the meticulous care he always invested in personal details. She had seen it once, years ago, when he had worn it for an occasion she could barely remember without feeling the weight of regret. Holding it now, the metal cold and heavy against her fingers, Maya felt a sudden surge of dread. He had been here. He had been close. And yet, the room was empty. Her mind raced. Was he watching? Had he been observing the event from the shadows, waiting for a moment to appear? Had he intended this as a warning, or was it a prelude to something worse? She forced herself to calm down, to breathe, to think logically, but the panic had already gripped her. It had been 5 years, and still Julian had the power to invade her life without entering it physically. Outside, the city had begun to darken as the sun disappeared behind the skyline. Maya kept the cufflink in her palm, pressing it against her heart, the cold metal almost searing against her skin. She felt her daughter's presence beside her even when the little girl slept miles away. She knew that she had to act carefully. One misstep, one decision guided by fear rather than strategy, could place them both at risk. The rest of the evening passed with her moving through a haze of smiles and speeches, but her mind was elsewhere. She couldn't stop thinking about the cufflink, the impossible audacity of someone leaving it behind, and the certainty that Julian was alive. The night felt heavier than any before it, as though the air itself were pregnant with anticipation and menace. By the time the event concluded, volunteers were cleaning, donors were leaving, and Maya had excused herself to the private office at the back of the hall. She placed the cufflink on her desk, studying it under the soft lamplight. It gleamed, almost challenging her, reminding her of the man who had once held her life in his hands and threatened everything she loved. Her fingers traced the engraved initials repeatedly, as if doing so could summon some clarity about his intentions. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden vibration from the office phone. She picked it up cautiously. The voice on the other end was flat, official, and delivered in a tone that froze her completely. "This is to notify you that Julian Voss has been declared legally dead." The words hit her with the weight of a collapsing building. Her chest tightened, her mind raced, and 1,000 memories of fear, betrayal, and unanswered questions flooded her consciousness. Everything she had been building, every day spent forging a life of independence and strength, now carried the shadow of his supposed death. She felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. If he was dead, did the threats finally end? Or was this just another deception, another layer in a long game she could not yet see? Her hands gripped the desk so tightly that the cufflink left a dent in her skin. Outside, the night seemed darker than before. The city noises felt distant, the air pressed against her like a weight she couldn't lift. She leaned back, closing her eyes, but sleep would not come. The fact that Julian had been declared dead did not erase the lingering feeling that he was near, watching, planning. That cufflink had proven it. Her mind replayed every shadow she had seen that evening, every flicker of motion behind the crowd, the tension in the hooded volunteers' movements. Everything pointed to one truth. Julian's influence, his presence, and his ability to manipulate events had not been extinguished. And though legally he might be dead, somewhere, somehow, he had a way to remain a threat. Maya finally rose, pacing the room, clutching the cufflink. She traced the initials once more, her fingers shaking. Every instinct she had learned over the past 5 years, the ability to anticipate danger, the need for vigilance, screamed at her. She knew she could not let her guard down, not for a single second. The world she had built with Ayan, with her daughter, with the women she had fought to protect, depended on her vigilance. Every shadow in the hall, every whisper of movement outside the windows, seemed to pulse with potential danger. The realization that Julian could still be alive, still watching, yet legally dead, was almost unbearable. She could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders more than ever before. The lines between fear and strategy blurred as she plotted her next moves, thinking about security, volunteers, and the ways someone might infiltrate her life unnoticed. Even as she sat at her desk, the cufflink in her hand, the news replayed in her mind. Julian declared dead. The word dead felt hollow, meaningless, and terrifying. She imagined his face, the same face that had once threatened to destroy her, smiling from the shadows, orchestrating everything she had worked so hard to achieve. She knew one thing. This was only the beginning. That night, Maya stared out at the city from Aurora's rooftop, cufflink in hand, as a sudden news alert flashed on her phone. Julian Voss, legally dead, has been spotted near the outskirts of the city. The city felt impossibly large and yet suffocatingly small as Maya stared at the alert on her phone. Julian was alive. The words reverberated in her skull, pounding with every heartbeat. The rooftop wind whipped her hair around her face, carrying the scent of wet asphalt and distant rain. Her fingers tightened around the phone until the edges cut into her palms, and she could feel her pulse hammering in rhythm with her thoughts. Ayan arrived silently, as he always did, sensing her tension before she spoke. His presence was steady, grounding, but it offered no comfort tonight. "Maya?" he asked softly. His voice had that quiet steadiness, the kind that forced her to breathe even when panic wanted to overtake her. She held up the phone. "He's alive, Ayan. Julian. He's out there. I know it. I feel it." He stepped closer, voice even, calm. "Then we'll prepare. You don't have to face this alone." But Maya could already feel the shadows stretching across every corner of her life. Julian's so-called death had been a lie. The cufflink she had found backstage was still warm in her palm, as if the man himself had pressed it there just moments ago. Her chest tightened again. He was not gone. He had never been gone. In the days that followed, strange patterns emerged. Anonymous donations began flooding Aurora Health Network, enormous sums that made her accountant's eyes widen in disbelief. Each payment traced back to shell companies that led, in convoluted layers, to Julian's old accounts. The money itself was a mystery, but Maya didn't feel gratitude. She felt fear. Every deposit was a message, every transaction a reminder that he had access to resources and influence she could not begin to imagine. Then the letters started. Small envelopes, always slipped beneath the door or delivered without signature. They contained notes praising her daughter's art, each word carefully chosen, each sentence infused with familiarity. The handwriting was unmistakable. The curves of the letters, the loops, the subtle pressure at the corners of certain strokes, all pointed to one person, Julian. Maya's stomach twisted. She had fled him, built a life that kept them safe. Yet here he was, inserting himself into her daughter's life through ink and paper. The thought of him reaching for the child she had sworn to protect set her nerves on fire. Fury and fear twisted inside her simultaneously, a storm she could neither control nor escape. Sleep became impossible. Every creak in the building, every whisper of wind against the windows made her heart leap. Ayan watched her, patient, concerned, but he could not shield her from what Julian had already set into motion. Maya spiraled between panic and rage, the walls of her carefully constructed life suddenly feeling fragile, as if one misstep could allow him to crash through them completely. The gala rehearsal loomed, a high-profile event that demanded her presence despite her unease. The stage was empty when she arrived, the lights dimmed, casting long, stretching shadows across the polished floorboards. She ran a mic check, her voice echoing back to her in the vast, cavernous hall. It was routine, mundane, yet the emptiness amplified her awareness. Every heartbeat sounded like a drum, every movement magnified. Then she heard it, a single pair of hands clapping slowly, deliberately from the darkness of the audience seats. The sound was controlled, measured, terrifyingly precise. Her blood froze. She spun, searching for the source, her pulse hammering in her ears louder than the echo of the clap. The hall was vast, empty, or so it seemed. Each clap echoed like a pulse, and the darkness between the seats seemed to ripple, alive with intent. Maya's mind raced. Who would be here at this hour? Who could move with such stealth, such knowledge of her routine? The applause stopped. Her breath caught. Silence pressed down like a physical weight, only broken by the faint hum of the overhead lights. Her eyes darted across every row, every shadow, searching for a clue. Then movement. A figure rose from the darkness, tall, deliberate, careful not to disturb the stage lights. A cap shadowed the upper half of the face, hiding identity. Her heart hammered faster. Something about the movement, the tilt of the head, the way the shoulders carried themselves, made her stomach knot with recognition she refused to acknowledge. Maya stepped closer, trying to convince herself it was an employee, a volunteer, someone ordinary. But the instincts honed over years of evading Julian screamed at her. This is him. The figure paused, waiting. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire ready to snap. The dim light caught a glint near the wrist, a watch she had once memorized. Her pulse raced. Every training, every precaution she had practiced for the past 5 years seemed to vanish. Then the cap lifted ever so slightly. Her stomach dropped, her hands went cold, and the world around her seemed to still. The eyes, those piercing, cold, intelligent eyes stared back at her. Eyes she had once loved, hated, and feared, all at once. Julian, alive. In the same hall she had called a sanctuary, alive, watching, waiting. Maya's mind screamed, heart pounding, legs rooted to the polished floorboards. 1,000 questions collided at once. Was he here to harm her? To reclaim the child he had once tried to destroy? Or was this a sick game, a test of her courage, of her resolve? The man's gaze held hers, unblinking, unwavering, calculating. He did not move toward her, yet his presence dominated the hall. The shadows seemed to bend toward him, the silence amplifying the threat of the unknown. She realized with a shiver that every precaution she had taken, every barrier she had built, was meaningless in the face of him. Maya's mind raced through possibilities. Should she call security? Should she flee? Or should she confront him, demand answers, risk exposing the child she had fought so hard to protect? Each choice felt heavier than the last. She knew Julian was capable of anticipating every action, every reaction, every step she might take. He was not just a man. He was a storm she could not outrun. The faintest movement caught her eye. The figure's hand brushed against the edge of the seat, deliberate, precise. She noticed the faint shimmer of metal at his wrist, a subtle glint that sent a chill through her. Julian had arrived, but the intent behind his presence was still unreadable. He could be here to apologize, to threaten, to manipulate, or worse. The stage lights flickered overhead. Maya's voice caught in her throat. She could feel the crowd's absence as an oppressive weight, the emptiness emphasizing the singularity of this moment. Her daughter's face flashed in her mind, the small hands clutching paper and pencils, the quiet laughter of innocent creativity. Julian's return threatened not only her peace, but the life she had built for them both. She forced herself to breathe, grounding her gaze on his eyes. Fear twisted with rage, confusion, and unresolved grief. She had spent 5 years building a fortress around herself and her child, and now Julian stood at the threshold, eyes gleaming with intent she could not yet discern. Every instinct screamed to run, every memory screamed not to trust him, and yet she could not look away. The applause had stopped. The figure remained still. The air between them pulsed with unspoken words, history, and threats left unresolved. Maya's mind spun with what-ifs, every scenario more dangerous than the last. She knew this confrontation, however brief, would change everything. A faint click echoed from the shadows, subtle but deliberate. Her hands twitched, reaching instinctively for the mic, as if it could be a weapon, a shield, or a lifeline. Julian's eyes never wavered, never shifted. He was patient, calculated, and terrifyingly certain. The realization hit her. He had not come here by accident. This was intentional. And whatever game he intended to play, she would have no warning, no preparation, only reaction. The world narrowed to a single point, his eyes unblinking, unyielding, and impossibly alive. Maya could feel the tension radiating from him, a silent command that demanded recognition, demanded response, demanded fear. She swallowed hard, her chest tight, mind racing. Every lesson from the past 5 years, the discipline, the vigilance, the planning, felt both sufficient and utterly useless. Julian had always been one step ahead, and this moment proved it once again. She was trapped, exposed, and entirely at his mercy, yet the instinct to fight surged stronger than ever. The empty hall became a crucible of tension, a battlefield of past and present colliding. Maya felt time slow, each second stretching into an eternity. Every detail, the polished stage floor, the distant city lights outside the windows, the faint hum of ventilation, was magnified, made alive by the threat in front of her. And then, as if sensing her hesitation, he moved. Not toward her, but just enough to tilt the cap higher, revealing more of the face she could never forget. The unmistakable, cold, calculating eyes she had once known, now sharper, darker, filled with intent that chilled her to the bone. Maya's breath caught in her throat. Her hands clenched the mic, knuckles white. The silence hung like a blade poised above her. And she knew with a clarity that made her tremble that her life, and the life of her daughter, would never be the same again. The man in the cap lifted his head fully, and in the dim light Maya's world froze. Those eyes, Julian's eyes, were staring straight at her, unflinching, unbroken, and unmistakably alive. Maya's body froze as Julian's eyes held hers across the empty auditorium. The space between them was taut with unspoken words, years of pain, and the threat of a presence she had thought gone forever. The man she had fled from, the man who had once threatened to dismantle everything she loved, was alive, not in rumor or shadow, but in flesh and bone, watching her with intent. Every fiber of her being screamed to act, to flee, to protect her daughter and herself, yet her legs refused to move. The weight of the past 5 years pressed on her chest like a vice. He did not move forward immediately. Instead, Julian remained in the shadows, a figure more specter than man, the dim light outlining the sharp angles of his face, the hollow planes of his cheeks, the beard untrimmed, giving him a gaunt, almost haunted look. His hair fell carelessly over his forehead, and his clothes hung slightly loose, as though he had shrunk in both stature and presence. There was a fatigue there, a desperation mingled with the danger she had always known. The man before her was thinner than she remembered, shadows under his eyes carved by nights she could only imagine. Yet his gaze burned with the same intensity, the same unrelenting calculation. Maya's throat tightened, and her hands trembled around the mic. She could feel the years of pain, anger, and fear coiling in her chest, ready to erupt. Every warning she had learned over the years, every lesson in vigilance, screamed at her that he was not here for reconciliation. He had survived, but survival had brought him only closer to the darkness that had once consumed him. Then he spoke, his voice low, almost trembling, and it cut through the silence like a knife. "Maya, don't scream. Please, I had to. I had to escape before it all destroyed me." His words were careful, calculated, yet laced with a vulnerability that was almost foreign to the Julian she remembered. He stepped closer, but not enough to reach her, moving along the edge of the scaffolding like a predator circling its prey, yet somehow seeking forgiveness at the same time. Maya's fury ignited. 5 years of fear, 5 years of fighting to build a life without him, surged like wildfire under her skin. She could feel it crawling up her spine, filling her veins with heat, making her heartbeat thunder against her ears. "You had no right," she said, voice shaking but fierce. "No right to touch our lives, our daughter, in shadows and lies. You had no right to breathe near us after what you did." Julian flinched as if her words had struck him physically. He lowered his eyes for a brief moment, then met her gaze again, hollow, haunted, but earnest. I know I don't deserve anything, but I had to see her. I had to see her grow, even from afar. I was afraid. Afraid that my presence would ruin her, ruin you again. I couldn't risk it. I couldn't risk touching your life and destroying everything you've built." Maya's lips pressed into a thin line. Anger warred with confusion, with fragments of memory she couldn't discard. Every instinct told her he was lying, yet there was a fragility there that made her hesitate. He had always been manipulative, but now there was something raw beneath it, something unguarded, as though the Julian who had threatened her so mercilessly had finally been stripped of pretense. He moved slightly closer, but the shadows remained between them. "I am not here to hurt you," he whispered, voice breaking, almost pleading. I am so sorry, Maya. I never wanted to leave, to hurt, to threaten. My father, my father would have destroyed me if I didn't disappear. I had no choice but to fake it, to vanish, to survive." Maya shook her head, incredulous. "And what about the letters, the gifts, the donations traced to your accounts? You think that makes up for years of fear, years of looking over my shoulder?" Her voice rose, fierce, trembling with pent-up rage. "You endangered our child. You endangered me." Julian's shoulders sagged, and for the first time, she saw genuine regret etched into the lines of his face. He stepped back, as though acknowledging the distance he had imposed was necessary, yet his eyes remained fixed on hers. "I only ever wanted to watch her, to admire her from a distance. I wanted to see her talent, her beauty, without being the disaster I always feared I'd be. I never intended to intrude. I never intended to hurt you again." Maya's jaw tightened. She didn't believe him, not entirely. His presence here, now, after all he had done, screamed that this could not be pure remorse. She could feel the lie in his measured words, the tension beneath the apology, the cold calculation hiding behind the emotion. 5 years of fear and survival had taught her too much to be fooled so easily. Every shadow around them seemed to pulse with threat. The scaffolding that surrounded the backstage area became a maze of possibilities, of escape routes and hiding places, each one a reminder of the fragility of the control she thought she had. Ion's warnings echoed in her mind. Never underestimate him. Never assume he is gone. Then she heard it, the soft, rhythmic pounding of security footsteps approaching from the far end of the hall. Their proximity sliced through the fragile bubble. of tension between them, breaking the fragile illusion of control Julian might have held. The sound made her chest tighten further. He had always been acutely aware of escape routes, of timing, of the element of surprise. Julian's eyes flicked to the approaching sounds, calculating. The mask of apology slipped for an instant, replaced by the predator she remembered. He shifted quickly, fluidly, moving toward the scaffolding above her head. "I have to go," he murmured, almost to himself. "I can't. Not now." Maya's anger flared hotter than ever. "Go. After everything. You think you can just disappear again." She lunged slightly forward, but the distance, the scaffolding, and his speed made her efforts meaningless. He ascended into the shadows, leaving only the echo of his presence behind, the faint scent of his cologne lingering in the air like a memory she could not shake. She stood frozen, the stage lights washing the space in pale gold, her chest heaving, anger and fear twisting together in a storm she could not quell. She knew he had vanished, but the proof of his presence, the warmth of the cufflink, the sound of his voice, the hollow intensity of his eyes, remained like an imprint on her mind. She had glimpsed the edge of a world she thought she had escaped, and it terrified her. Hours later, the gala concluded. Volunteers packed away decorations, reporters filed their stories, and Maya retreated to the office she had made into a sanctuary over the years. She tried to convince herself she was safe, that he was gone, but the phone on her desk vibrated, illuminating the room with a cold blue light. She froze before reaching for it. A message, unknown number. Her heart thundered as she read, "If you don't let me see her tomorrow, I'll have no reason left to run." The words seared into her mind. Julian had returned, not to apologize, not to explain, not even to beg entirely, but to threaten, to manipulate, to challenge every boundary she had built for herself and her daughter. The calm she had felt in the years of building Aurora Health Network evaporated instantly. Maya pressed her forehead to the desk, inhaling shakily. The room was quiet, but her world was not. Every instinct screamed danger. Every memory screamed survival. And for the first time in years, she understood that the battle she had fought to protect her child was only just beginning. The shadows outside the office window seemed darker than before, heavier. She realized with a chill that Julian's presence, his mind, his obsession, had reached a new level. He was no longer the man she could evade. He had returned with knowledge, intent, and the terrifying willingness to cross any boundary to see the child he once threatened to destroy. Her fists clenched. She would not allow him to harm her daughter. Not now. Not ever. But as the words from the text lingered, she could feel the inevitability of confrontation, pressing down like a storm she could not outrun. The night had become a battleground, the rules unknown, and the enemy frighteningly close. Every memory of his previous threats, every lesson she had learned over the years, surged into her consciousness. She would need courage, strategy, and strength she did not know she still possessed. And yet, she also knew that Julian's unpredictability made even the most carefully laid plans fragile. He had returned, but what he intended was still unknown, and that uncertainty was more dangerous than any weapon. Maya's phone buzzed again. Another unknown number, another message. "Tomorrow, I decide whether I run, or end this forever." The night of the gala arrived with an intensity that pressed against every nerve Maya had. Aurora Hall gleamed like a jewel beneath the city lights, its grand chandeliers casting warm gold over rows of tables carefully arranged for donors, activists, government officials, and media representatives. The air was electric, a delicate balance between celebration and expectation. Maya's pulse raced even as she moved across the stage, rehearsing her speech in her mind, grounding herself in the purpose she had built her life around. She could feel Ayan's presence just behind the crowd, vigilant, observant, protective. His eyes followed the entrances, the exits, the shadows along the edges of the room. Maya took a deep breath, her fingers brushing the notes on the podium. She would speak tonight not only as the founder of Aurora Health Network, but as a woman who had survived threats, loss, and fear, and had turned those experiences into empowerment for countless others. As she began her speech, words flowing with practiced rhythm, praising the courage and resilience of the women her nonprofit served, she noticed the subtle shift in the room. The lights flickered once, twice, a brief dimming that she first assumed was a technical glitch. Yet something in the movement of shadows along the far side of the hall caused her stomach to tighten. And then she saw him. Julian emerged from the darkness like a ghost returning to life. Alive, real, present. Gasps erupted around the room, a wave of shock that rippled across the polished floors and crystal glasses. Cameras swiveled, phones flashed, and reporters whispered into microphones, capturing the impossible sight of the man thought to be dead. Julian's clothes were slightly disheveled, his hair untamed, his eyes wild but focused. His presence alone pulled the room into a charged silence, a moment suspended between disbelief and fear. Maya froze. Her pulse thundered in her ears, her mind spinning. He stepped forward with hesitance, each movement deliberate, as though he weighed every step against the potential chaos it might unleash. Her gaze locked with his, and for an instant, the world beyond the hall ceased to exist. All she could see was the man who had haunted her past, who had tried to control her life, who had forced her into exile. Then Julian seized the microphone. His voice trembled as he began to speak, raw and unsteady, carrying across the hall like a confession that had been held hostage for too long. "Maya, I owe you everything. I, I owe you and her an explanation," he whispered, pausing to swallow against the weight of the room's silence. He spoke of the blackmail from his dying father, the empire built on corruption, the cowardice that had made him flee instead of fight, the years he had spent hiding in shame, pretending to be someone he could not allow the world to see. The audience hung on every word, the lights dimmed as if to spotlight his remorse. Cameras clicked, capturing the moment for the news feeds that would travel faster than human voices. Julian's voice cracked under the strain, revealing the man beneath the mask, the vulnerable, flawed, and desperate individual who had once terrified Maya. "Everything I did," he continued, voice breaking, "was out of fear. Fear of losing everything my father controlled, fear of destroying the woman I loved, and fear of failing as a father. I see now that I ran from my responsibilities, and I am so sorry." His hands shook as he held the microphone, gripping it as if it could anchor him to reality, to her, to the possibility of forgiveness he had no right to ask for. Maya's heart raced, torn between fury, disbelief, and a small flicker of pity she fought to suppress. Her daughter's safety, the walls she had built to protect her, the life she had created, they all pressed against her like the weight of inevitability. She stepped forward instinctively, preparing to shield the girl from a man who had been both predator and father, unsure whether the intent behind his confession was sincere or another layer of manipulation. Just as Julian's voice wavered and he muttered, "Maya, please let me meet our daughter," chaos erupted. Investigators stormed the room with precise coordination, their presence sudden and overwhelming. They carried warrants, badges, and authority, sweeping toward Julian with unyielding determination. The sound of their footsteps on polished floors echoed like thunder, blending with the gasps of the crowd and the murmurs of reporters. Julian froze, eyes widening for the first time, caught between vulnerability and the inevitability of justice. Maya pivoted instinctively, stepping in front of her daughter, shielding her small frame with her body. Panic surged through the hall, adrenaline flooding every nerve. The little girl clutched her mother's dress, eyes wide with fear, barely understanding the storm around her. In the confusion, The child stumbled. Her tiny foot caught the edge of the podium. The sound of splintering wood snapped through the air, sharp and sudden. The girl crashed into the structure, sending papers, notes, and microphones toppling in a violent cascade. Maya's breath hitched as she lunged to steady her daughter, fear and relief crashing together. Julian's confession, the investigator's intrusion, the collapse of the podium, everything collided in a moment of surreal intensity. The polished stage floor, the golden light, the stunned silence of the audience, the journalists capturing every second, all bore witness to the unraveling of a life built on secrecy, power, and fear. Julian stood frozen, a man exposed before the world, shivering under the weight of the law and the truth he could no longer escape. Maya watched, her chest tight, heart pounding with a mixture of rage, relief, and disbelief. The empire that had threatened countless lives, that had forced her into exile, that had created years of fear, was crumbling, collapsing in front of her very eyes. Every whisper, every gasping breath in the hall echoed her own emotions. The collapse of the podium became a symbol she could not ignore. Julian's facade, once impenetrable, shattered irreparably. The power he had wielded through fear and manipulation disintegrated in a single chaotic moment, leaving him vulnerable, human, exposed. Maya bent down, gathering her daughter into her arms, holding her close against the tremor of the stage. Tears threatened, blurring her vision as she realized the enormity of the moment. Julian's presence, the confession, the investigators, the media, they had all converged, forcing a reckoning she had anticipated but could not fully prepare for. Julian's eyes, wide with shock and humiliation, met hers again, lingering not with the old arrogance but with desperation. He had lost control entirely. His empire, his manipulation, his secrets, they had collapsed in a spectacle witnessed by the world. The very life he had tried to dominate, the woman he had once threatened, had endured. In that instant, Maya felt a strange mix of triumph, relief, and sorrow. Years of fear, anger, and vigilance had led to this collapse, yet the cost had been immense. The podium lay in ruins at her feet, splintered wood scattered like fragments of the past he had tried to dominate. The audience murmured in stunned silence, cameras flashing, capturing the symbolism of Julian's final unmasking. The little girl pressed against Maya's chest, trembling but unharmed. Maya's hands rested on her shoulders, grounding them both in the reality of survival. Around them, chaos rippled through the gala, journalists whispering into microphones, donors murmuring anxiously, activists exchanging wide-eyed glances. Julian's life, carefully hidden, had been laid bare. She realized in the quiet aftermath of the collapse that the world had seen it all: the fear, the manipulation, the confession, and the ultimate crumbling of a kingdom built on corruption and deceit. Maya had survived, her daughter had survived, and Julian, for all his plans and schemes, had been forced to confront the consequences of the life he had led. Maya's eyes scanned the audience, seeing faces frozen in shock, in judgment, in awe. The weight of the moment pressed down on her, heavy with significance. Years of trauma, danger, and vigilance had culminated in this spectacle. Julian's empire was gone, his secrets unveiled, and the child he had tried to stalk now safe in her mother's embrace. She felt Ayan's hand on her shoulder, grounding her in the aftermath. "It's over," he murmured, though the tremor in his voice betrayed the intensity of the night. Maya nodded slowly, still clutching her daughter, her gaze lingering on the shattered podium, a symbol of the man who had tried to dominate their lives, now reduced to splinters. Even as the investigators escorted Julian from the stage, his head bowed, shoulders hunched, she understood that this was a moment of reckoning not only for him, but for herself, for her daughter, and for every woman who had ever been threatened by power masquerading as invincibility. The podium had split and fallen, a final symbol of Julian's collapse, and Maya realized with a shiver that the entire world had just witnessed it, and that the consequences of this exposure were only beginning. The courtroom was silent except for the measured footsteps of the officers and the distant murmur of reporters outside. Julian's sentence had been pronounced. Years of imprisonment for fraud, bribery, and corruption, crimes he had meticulously tried to hide, now laid bare for the world to see. Maya sat in the back, her daughter clutching her hand, feeling the tension of the past 5 years finally release into a tangible moment of justice. Julian, once untouchable, was now a man reduced to the consequences of his own choices. His gaze, when it briefly met hers, held a shadow of remorse, but it could not undo the years of fear he had caused. The trial concluded with precision. But for Maya, the weight of victory was not in the legal judgment. It was in the knowledge that they had survived, that her daughter had emerged unharmed, and that the empire of lies had finally crumbled. Prison life, however, transformed Julian in ways he could not have predicted. Isolated from power, stripped of influence, he returned to the art he had hidden for decades. Sketches and paintings filled his cell, raw expressions of regret, longing, and self-reflection. Maya never saw the artwork, but she received fragments through letters, careful, broken attempts at apology and reflection. Each letter she read aloud to her daughter became a ritual of closure rather than reconciliation. The words were heavy with honesty and shame, yet they were not meant to rebuild the bond Julian had fractured. They were meant to allow Maya and her child to acknowledge the past, recognize the harm, and move forward with the knowledge that his remorse could no longer hold power over their lives. Meanwhile, Aurora Health Network expanded beyond the city, beyond the country. Maya's vision had been clear from the start: to empower women, to provide health care, to give voice and opportunity to those ignored and neglected. Now, global partnerships and initiatives took shape, transforming Aurora into a movement that could not be silenced or threatened. Maya watched the organization flourish, each success a quiet but potent testament to resilience and courage. Ayan remained by her side throughout, not as a replacement for the life and love that had been stolen, but as a companion in building something new. He did not seek to overshadow the past, he sought to create a future. Together they navigated the growth of Aurora, the media attention, the scrutiny, and the accolades with care and humility, grounding each step in purpose rather than ego. Her daughter, now a teenager, moved through life with confidence born of survival and love. The child who had once been stalked by shadows now stood firmly in the light, her artistic talent shining as brightly as the courage she had inherited from her mother. She had inherited Julian's gift without his burden. She painted with joy, untainted by manipulation or fear. The scholarship event marked a culmination of everything Maya had worked for. Her daughter approached the podium, papers clutched in small hands, eyes shining with the certainty of a young woman who understood her own strength. The room was filled with donors, students, faculty, and media, all anticipating a moment of recognition. And yet, when she spoke, her words carried power beyond expectation. "My mother gave me everything," she said, voice clear and steady, echoing in the auditorium. "I want the world to honor her, not him. I will not meet my father. I do not need to. The life, the opportunities, the love I have received are proof that he does not define me." Maya's chest tightened. Tears threatened, but they were not of grief. They were tears of pride, relief, and profound love. She realized in that moment that the legacy Julian had tried to destroy had instead become the very thing that defeated him. Every struggle, every risk, every act of courage had culminated in this declaration of independence, of triumph, of life lived on their own terms. She watched her daughter return to her seat, graceful and confident, and felt the years of worry, fear, and vigilance melt into the warmth of accomplishment. The gala applause, the flashing cameras, the murmurs of admiration, all faded into the background of a private moment of victory between mother and child. Later, back at home, Maya sat in the quiet of her study, letters from Julian neatly stacked in front of her. Each one told a story of regret, self-reflection, and the slow unraveling of a man who had once wielded fear like a weapon. She opened the final letter, its edges worn, the ink slightly smudged from her handling over the years. The words were simple, unadorned: acknowledgement of wrongdoing, recognition of harm caused, and a final plea for forgiveness that could not undo the past. Maya traced the letters with her fingers, reading slowly, allowing each word to resonate. And then she folded the letter carefully, placing it back in the envelope. She whispered a quiet goodbye. Finally, free, she murmured. The weight she had carried for years lifted slightly, as though the air around her had become lighter, as though the chains Julian had forged through fear and manipulation had finally been broken. Outside, the city carried on. Aurora Health Network's offices buzzed with energy, staff moving confidently through halls lined with artwork, achievements, and stories of lives transformed. Maya felt the pulse of the world moving forward, the proof of her impact, and the realization that the past, though heavy, could not dictate the future. Ayan joined her, offering a gentle smile, a hand to hold. There was no need for words. The bond they shared was built on trust, respect, and shared purpose. Together they walked toward the window, looking out at the lights of the city, a city that had once felt dangerous and constricting, now full of possibility and promise. Her daughter, sitting nearby, sketched quietly, a notebook open, the room filled with the soft scratch of pencil on paper. Each line, each shadow, each detail was a testament to life, growth, and the strength inherited from her mother. Julian's legacy no longer loomed. He was present only in memory. A cautionary tale, a broken figure whose choices had yielded justice, but no reclamation. Maya closed her eyes briefly, breathing deeply. The letters, the trials, the threats, all had led to this moment: survival, triumph, and a life reclaimed from shadows. She understood fully that freedom was not merely the absence of danger, but the presence of love, purpose, and resilience. As the evening deepened into night, she walked past the framed letters, past photographs of her daughter, past reminders of the work Aurora had accomplished. The quiet enveloped her, a sanctuary built on courage, justice, and the unwavering devotion of a mother to her child. She sat at her desk one last time, placing the final letter into the drawer. It was not a relic of hate or fear. It was a marker of the journey, of lessons learned, and of the power of surviving intact, stronger and wiser than ever before. Maya whispered once more, softly, to the empty room, to the life she had built, and to the daughter she had protected through every trial. We are free, finally free. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the dark sky, a reminder that life moves forward, that legacies are built on courage, and that love, steadfast, enduring, and selfless, rises from even the deepest ruins. As Maya closed the drawer on Julian's last letter, her daughter placed a small, finished sketch on the desk, a portrait of Maya, strong, radiant, and unshaken. Maya smiled through tears, unaware that a single figure watched from the shadowed corner of the office window, a silent observer of the life they had rebuilt, hinting that the past's echoes might never fully fade.